Today, with a new week, we're also beginning a new line of videos where we go over some of the more popular and powerful specs at the very beginning, at the very early shaping of the meta of this season. Why? Well, because, popular specs are always more looked into and also more interested by other players, especially the ones currently in full panic mode, thinking about, should I flavor of the month reroll last second because I completely botched my predictions? I thought Red Paladin was going to be meta. Oh god, no, it's Frost Decay, better reroll. Maybe I bet everything on Prot Paladin. Turns out I should go and play, I don't know, Vengeance Demon Hunter. So obviously, the more powerful specs, the more attention you will get from them at the very beginning of a season. Players going into the Race to World first streams or checking out already high Mythic Plus keys being completed, they see certain comps, they wonder why certain specs are being played over others, etc, etc. So for today, the first one in the very beginning is going to be Resto Shaman. Totally not because I am maining Resto Shaman, but because it is the most played of the healers in Heroic Raiding. It is the second most played healer in Mythic Raiding, only because guilds are, forced to bring one Paladin, and that's wholly for Mythic Raiding, and the most played healer in Mythic Plus as well, both at all key levels, but also in high 10 plus keys. Hopefully, this will be quite good, not just for other healers wondering why another spec of healer they are not playing is considered more powerful, but also for the tanks and the DPS, who might get to learn of a few tips here and there on how to better make sure you're always able to be healed and properly protected by your neighboring Resto Shaman in your groups. Let's get this easy, quick and fast explanations out of the way. Resto Shamans go for crit and verse. No matter the activity, raid or Mythic Plus, which is good, you get to play with both of the same secondary stats. Crit is very simple. You do synergize very well with crit. Your crits are harder than other specs. You also get way more mana back thanks to your crit. You have more synergy with certain features like your Tidal Waves crit chance with Healing Surge. So crit for you just becomes more valuable. After crit is pretty much just the second worst, because haste is terrible for Resto Shaman. We will get into it shortly. And then mastery, while it does sound good on paper, it can't really get its full effect, its full benefit nearly as often, especially in Mythic Plus. That's even worse than in the raid. So it is a pretty simple combo of secondary stats. Even better when you think that quite few other specs actually go for crit verse, meaning that most of the crit verse items you will have your best in slot on them. Higher priority for that type of loot. The larger surprise, however, is in the hero talent, because initially Totemic was pegged as the raid talent, whereas Farseer was more of a Mythic Plus kind of thing. You get triple charges of Riptide, so it's easier for spot healing fewer targets. You get also a talent to then become even stronger with your direct heals. Not having to go chain heal would have allowed you to drop a whole bunch of chain heal related talents to actually spend them in just better and more powerful talents you could use in Mythic Plus. However, that turned out not really to be true. Pretty much every one of the more played builds is just Totemic. It's just Totemic with a few talent swaps here and there. Do you want a Purge? Do you want a Wind Rush? But then you just stay as Totemic. Totemic plays extremely hard around Chain Heal, right? In case it's not obvious, Totemic does play very hard in actually doing stuff with Chain Heal, and as a result, you do kind of want to get every single Chain Heal related talent in existence. The only one you don't want is the one that's based on, jumping to more targets and having higher reach and whatnot, because you're not playing in a raid. You don't need this to jump around by that much. But that is the core TLDR pretty much of the entire build. You power up Chain Heal as much as you can from the reduced cast time of your Tidal Waves, giving players max 10% HP when they get targeted by Chain Heal. Of course, Ancestral Reach itself to make it bounce an additional time to guarantee 5 targets hit in Mythic Plus, plus the extra powerful effect of healing for 8% more, Earth Living Weapon itself proccing from Chain Heal, and then you pair this together with Lively Totems. So 3 casts of Chain Heals whenever you place down one of your throughput, so non-utility type of totems. This totem actually does consume all of the buffs you might have from Chain Heal, from your kit. For example, if you were to use Unleash Life, which makes Chain Heal heal for 15% more and bounce to one additional target, if you place down Healing Tide Totem, which casts a free Chain Heal, Lively Totems would be consuming the buff from Unleash Life. This gives the Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus as well, not just in the raid, a lot of time to do other things, because now placing down Healing Stream Totem is an instacast Chain Heal, so it is a lot of extra free healing without you actually having to be doing much. This can also give you slightly more room to be more single target focused. Imagine a certain player getting tracked by one of these very hard hitting hots in these Mythic Plus keys, while some kind of AoE is going down. You can put down 2 charges of Healing Stream Totem to heal the raid with free casts of Chain Heal, while at the same time you are using Healing Surge on one target. So you're able to do a little bit of both at the same time as a Resto Shaman. You do have a massive amount of cooldowns you can rotate between Healing Tide Totem plus Spirit Link Totem plus Ascendance. You have practically 3 different cooldowns on a 2 or 3, and then 3-minute cooldown. Pretty much 1 minute per pool, kind of. You can rotate between these cooldowns. You can even make, makeshift cooldowns yourself, like having 2 charges of Healing Stream Totem and do Healing Stream Totem number 1, Healing Stream Totem number 2, use Totemic Recall to then use Healing Stream Totem number 3, and that would practically be another mini cooldown as a Shaman. You are actually also gotten unnaturally tanky in this season after the rework to your trees as a whole, as well as what we mentioned on Resto Shaman actually going for versatility. Nowadays, your run-of-the-mill Resto Shaman can get close to or at 20% versatility, which is 20% damage reduction. Obviously, your run-of-the-mill DPS spec going for haste and mastery won't get any of this, maybe 3 or 4% from their, few verse pieces they have. But Resto Shaman will have a much higher defensive power thanks to versatility, as well as thanks to Earth and Harmony, which gives them 5% damage reduction from having Earth Shield on themselves. That already makes you pretty tanky. You already have the 6% damage reduction from magical damage, so all of those kind of dots on you will be ticking for 6% less on top of that. If they are of a particular elemental type, considering you have almost always active and running your Healing Stream Totem, that will also be 6% less damage, happening quite often, as well as pretty much this constant refresher every 30 seconds of Wind Barrier, because you will be having pretty much every time at least one of your totems out to be giving you an Absorb Shield. This is what makes Resto Shaman very good when it comes to both healing for AoE damage, big chunks of damage chunking down the raid by 40%, they can just chunk down their Healing Stream Totems, because they do decent consistent healing themselves, but also because of the free cast of the Chain Heal from Lively Totems. Very good spot healing. Healing Surge itself is already a pretty chunky heal, buffed by Undulation, especially Healing Wave buffed by Undulation becomes massive. You also then have your Master of the Elements, which can make your Healing Surge even larger. And finally, Tidal Waves buffed by your tier set, giving you practically a bit over 50% critical strike chance on your Healing Surge on top of the 25+% you already have yourself. Also make you have very good single target healing as well, right? And then their near unrivaled CC, right? They have an AoE totem on a 35-ish second cooldown. They have their Thunderstorm as a knock-up on a 25-second cooldown if they want to. They even have a single target stun. They already have a melee tier interrupt on just 12 seconds. And if that's not enough, they can also cover other things like being able to have a Purge, being able to have a Hex, being able to have a Wind Rush. On top of that, a Wind Rush that can remove snares. They can also double up on any of these totems again by using Totemic Recall to reset their cooldown, and even things like Poison Cleansing Totem, which is coming quite useful in some of these keys like Arakara, with these pesky mobs with very hard-hitting poison dots all over the place. This gets to be pretty useful. Now, however, what we are interested into also is, okay, but what are the weaknesses of Resto Shaman, number one, and also how could I play better with the Resto Shaman in a group? Well, number one, we start with a light level weakness, which is the damage. I know you're telling me, well, it's still third, that's not really that much of a weakness. It is, however, not great. Pretty much the majority of the power of the Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus will be coming from putting down your Surging Totem and let Acid Rain do ticking damage. In your spare time, you can chunk a couple of lava bursts out, spam some Chain Lightning when you have free time, but this doesn't net, some top tier level damage, which might be an issue, might become an issue. For now, it certainly isn't, but it's not one of their strong points right now. The other weakness of Resto Shaman is the lack of an external. We don't have Pain Suppression, we don't have Life Cocoon, Blessing of Sacrifice, or even Iron Bark in this establishment. We actually have nothing. However, lining up the Copium for Resto Shaman, what they do have is a very strong layer of small incremental increases, which almost match and in some cases definitely surpass the power of having an external for a single player. Because what they already give out permanently is 5% damage reduction for themselves and someone else. The someone else doesn't always have to be a tank. For example, if you're fighting the first boss of Necrotic Wake and he's about to do the Wretch, very hard-hitting targeted ability on one of your DPS, nothing stops you from actually moving your other Earth Shield away from the tank to that player to give them 5% damage reduction. You can certainly do that. What you can also do is simply cast Riptide on them, because Riptide will trigger Ancestral Vigor, which will also give them 10% more HP. So now you have given them 5% damage reduction and 10% max HP. What you can also do is place down your Surging Totem, which will activate Damper, and now you can activate Damper for an extra 10% max HP. So effectively, what you have given that player about to be hit by a very hard-hitting ability, 10% plus 10% max HP, so 20% max HP, and 5% damage reduction, which is pretty good. Of course, this becomes even better when you consider this can spread to everyone. So you can give your entire party 10% more HP with Ancestral Vigor, and then your entire party with Damper for another 10% max HP. So yes, they don't have a real external to give out to a player, so don't expect in your party, if you see, again, the boss targeting you with the dreaded super hard hitting dot, to be bailed out by a Life Cocoon, but there are other ways to be helped. This is when we move into the second weakness of Resto Shaman, which is the range. We're not talking about Preservation Evoker range. Shaman has their range just fine to 40 yards, is rather their healing and buffing range, which is limited within their healing range. Because even more so with Totemic, the problem of Shaman is that buffs like Damper only happen to the players inside the healing range. Buffs like Deluge, which is being healed by 15% more from pretty much all of the direct heals of a Shaman, only happen if you are inside your healing range or Riptide. Things like Chain Heal, of course, only happen if they are bouncing up to 15 yards to heal another target. So obviously what happens is that if you have ranged DPS in range and melee DPS in melee, that becomes kind of annoying. Sometimes it's even gonna be up to the Shaman to sort of fill the gap. The Shaman will see two brain dead range DPS sticking here, they will see the tank and the melee DPS being here, so it's the Shaman who realizes, hold on, I have to place myself here. So I'm gonna cast my Chain Heal to this target, so the Chain Heal will do this, 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 and this, and actually manage to heal everyone. But that would be the absolutely best case scenario. Most of the time, Chain Heal won't behave that way. Most of the time, in that position, all of the players won't be inside Surging Totem range or, Healing Rain range. They won't be inside Damper range. They very often won't be inside Spirit Link Totem range. That is what is going to be giving a weakness to a Resto Shaman compared to, for example, a Discipline Priest. A Discipline Priest very simply casts Radiance, tags with Atonement the entire party, and he is good to go. The only thing he wants to make sure of is for players to be in for Barrier. But besides that, he's ready to go. That's not nearly as much the case for Resto Shaman. And that can come and bite you in the ass, right? When you're fighting a boss, he's doing his AoE, his big AoE, ticking down players. You put down your Surging Totem, you activate Downpour for an extra heal, and then you put down Healing Stream Totem for a second free chain heal, and you see all of the party got up to 80% HP except for the Hunter. The Hunter is still at 40% HP. And his health is still ticking down from the AoE. Why? Because he dodged everything. He was in the back, didn't get healed by anything. That is not the best case scenario for a Resto Shaman. And to be fair, not to dump everything too much into a DPS, sometimes, especially in PAGs where you can't be nearly as coordinated, these situations will happen. There will be hectic boss fights where the room will start being covered in shit. You will be running all over the place, dodging this or that, moving away from a beam, from a laser, from an explosion. You will be constantly moving, and it will be harder for a Resto Shaman compared to others to be able to hit all players equally. That is, in Mythic Plus especially, by far the biggest weakness, because it's not nearly as visible, of course, in the raid. In the raid you have 20 players, your chain heal is hitting like 5 of them, so you more or less always will find a way to make this heal bounce to 5 players that need some healing. But in Mythic Plus, you will notice it much more if you're not being optimal with your healing abilities. So definitely the best tip for a DPS player when playing with a Resto Shaman is to have a laser eye focus on the placement of the healing rain. The closer you are to the healing rain, the more likely you are to be healed by the Resto Shaman. The further you stray away from that, the harder it will be for you to actually stay alive in your fights. Meanwhile, finishing with the weak point of Resto Shaman itself, their last weak point is definitely right now their mana. It's definitely a more visible problem in the raid than it is in Mythic Plus, but both specs in the raid and in Mythic Plus are playing Totemic, they are playing around chain heal, so the function of this problem is the same. You do spend a lot of mana casting chain heal. Casting chain heal has a lot of mana cost. We mentioned in yesterday's video how cheap Temporal Anomaly is for Preservation Evoker, mentioning how easy it is for Preservation Evokers to conserve mana. Temporal Anomaly is 7.5% of your base mana, Chain Heal is literally twice as much. And Chain Heal doesn't have a cooldown like Temporal Anomaly, you can spam Chain Heal, meaning it is much easier, it's much more tempting for you to go out of mana very quickly as a Resto Shaman. So you have to learn to conserve your mana quite a bit more than some other healers. Of course, not nearly as much for trash packs. In Mythic Plus, in that case, it's more about learning to run ahead of the tank and start drinking as soon as you go out of combat. If this fucking affix actually drops you out of combat and doesn't let you wait standing still for 5 seconds, it's more about managing your mana doing boss fights, not panicking for a certain mechanic, dropping players low and continuing to spam chain heals, because that will be a 2.5 minute boss fight, and if you keep doing that, you will eventually run by the end of it completely out of mana. That's the other and last weakness so far in this first week of the War Within's full season release when it comes to Resto Shaman, the currently most played healer at the early forming of the meta of this first season. So this was it for our first Mythic Plus spec focus recap, starting with Resto Shaman. Our next episode will follow one of the more popular of the DPS options at the moment. But for today, it is now time to leave each other. Thanks, of course, as usual, for everyone who has been watching the video, as well as supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. And with all of this out of the way, thank you guys for watching. See you guys tomorrow. And in the meantime, doesn't it break your heart when you finally eat your pizza, you fondly remember being good from that place, and you actually get disappointed?